I tend to take the view that Grundigs are always worth a look, even if it's not one of the classic well-known Grundigs like the Yacht Boy, but any of the boys are usually interesting. And this one, this is a Record Boy, likely I think to be, I'm pretty certain, early 70s radio. Not one of the top spec things really. There's no proper tone control, it's just got the top cut type thing. It's got a single slidey volume control there. Only has medium wave and FM, doesn't have long wave or short wave or anything like that. But in the modern world, I suspect that's not likely to be a problem for very long. It does feel, although it looks like it's taken a few knocks, it does feel reasonably solid still, because these things were built quite well, I think. It's still got its nice little Grundig badge down here. The telescopic aerial is still there, although it's a little bit loose. The handle isn't quite secure as it could be, but it is there. It's not missing like it often is. The tuning mechanism appears to operate correctly, which is good. The thing I did notice, if you look at it from this side, I don't know if you can really quite see it, but it's sort of going up at an angle here, so this end is sort of pushed further into the radio than that end is. So I wonder if it's been someone's had it apart and had a look at it before, so it may need a little bit of adjustment there. Obviously it needs a bit of a clean up. Looking round the back, there is very little to see. There's a mains battery switch over here and a external aerial socket. There's a thing there which looks like it could have been there for a DIN socket in a different model, but there's nothing on it in this one, so I don't know what that hole or that non-hole is for. And on the bottom of it, have I got this the right way up? I think I have. Well, the writing's the wrong way up, but the I'll just pull this little thing out here, and oddly enough it's got disassembly instructions on the other side of the battery cover, which will be quite useful, I suspect. PP9 battery compartment here, and a thing which is a very tight fit where you can stash the captive mains lead away, unfortunately with a 2-pin Euro style plug, and I don't recommend plugging this into your shaver socket. With these things, although some regard it as vandalism, I tend to sort of cut this off and replace it with an IEC inline plug, so that you can just plug a normal mains lead into it, because I think that's more useful and it doesn't take you ages to try and scrunch this back up into there. You can see also, actually, when you open this up and take the mains lead out, you can see this cover here for the loudspeaker, and it is a big substantial thing. So yeah, let's get it powered up and see what happens. Now, as I mentioned, a very common thing on Grundigs that you don't want to get caught out by is this battery mains switcher here. So if you think sometimes that it's not working, you have to make sure that if you plug the battery, it doesn't automatically switch. So if you're using the battery, you have to switch it to battery. So let's try that, and I know the handle's come off, which isn't exactly the outcome I wanted. So let's get it back in. So I've got the PP9 in there now, but sadly there is no sound on either medium wave or VHF, which is a bit of a shame. I can hear just a little pop from the speaker when I operate the on and off switch. So that suggests that at least some part of the audio chain is functioning. So next step is to get the thing apart, really. Now, I think what it says here, if you can see that top one, is that take those screws out and take the tuning knob off, and the whole thing should come apart, and probably the handle as well. The handle seems to be falling off anyway, so that doesn't take too long to do. So yeah, tuning knob. So is this true? It is. It can be true. It just pulls apart, look. Yeah, captive mains leads on these Grundig sets are an absolute pest and a nightmare. So there's the speaker. Seems to be at an angle. I assume that's correct. Let's turn it over a bit. So I think really it's largely a case of following where the power goes. And the thing is, these things are quite nicely constructed, I think, in terms of the solidity and reliability generally. But where they don't score so well usually is actually being able to get them apart for maintenance. So a little bit of further dismantling is going to be needed, I think, before I can get onto the component side of the board and possibly measure anything. And maybe I'll see if I can get hold of a bit of service information for it. Right, well, I've followed the instructions to get to the next stage, and in the process managed to break a little bit of brittle plastic off the facing bit, but that should glue back on. I've now got it so that I can get at the board a bit better, and I find that if I get the signal tracer, and it falls off straight away, if I get the signal tracer here, I can find some sound here. That is on AM at the moment, I think.
Every taste suffers a good deal better.
I'm Nick Ellaby, good afternoon. Saudi Arabia's Al Hilal have made a world record £259 million bid for Kylian Mbappe.
And let's just try the same thing on FM. I mean, the aerial's not up, but you can hear. We have got sound there on FM, so it looks really as if the power amplifier section is dead, so that's the thing we've got to look at. So probably I could do a sort of blind changing of capacitors and things like that, which might well work. Whether that's the best approach, I'm not sure. I will definitely try and get hold of a schematic for this and give myself a bit more of a clue as to what I'm doing for a change. Well, this has certainly been a bit of a journey. I don't ever learn, do I, about the concept of a radio that just doesn't turn on, doesn't make any sound. And it almost never is a simple fault, although it should be, you'd think. There's always multiple things wrong whenever I look at one anyway. And this one had a few hidden gems. I said earlier we'd look at the transistors and capacitors in the output stage, which is over here. I've never seen these Fracco capacitors very much before, and these are electrolytics of a very old type. They actually tested out okay and had very low ESR, equivalent series resistance, which suggests there wasn't anything wrong with them. I have looked around and people say, oh, if you see those, just chuck them out. And whether I'll do that or not, I'm not sure. I might still do that. I did change the output coupling capacitor, which is, you can't see it, is over here, because you still can't see it. It's over here, because it had quite an old electrolytic in there, similar to that one there, which I might well change as well. In fact, I might just go and do all those caps in any case, just because I've got the thing apart. Although, having got it working now, after a struggle, I'm sort of not inclined to disturb it in a way. So, let's go through what went wrong. I checked out, as I said, all the transistors and the capacitors in the output stage, and they were all fine. But we were still getting no sound out of it. As we could hear, we could go after the detector and we could get both FM and AM signals on our signal tracer. So it's definitely the audio amplifier that was at fault. To be fair, I didn't check the output transistors, but the signal wasn't getting any further than the first stage of the audio amp anyway. You can see here there's these 4 little slots, and I've seen this on quite a few Grundigs before, and this board here with the switches on it and some aerial related stuff also is done this way. It's like a circuit board which has got like through plating into the main board, and there was one in here with about 16 resistors and a diode on it or something like that, and I can just about show you that now. And I've had to rewire that, because I'll tell you what happened. I eventually found out, flexing the board around, that it came back, and that was around where this resistor pack was. So I decided, well, obviously it's the resistor pack that's done it, but it looked like there was and indeed there was, if you look here, a track you can just about see, I'll just bring it up here, you can see a track there that is completely black just at the side of that 3.3k resistor, and that track had basically gone. There was no contact there, so I thought, well, the only thing I can do is take the thing out and try and rebuild it. Having taken it out, of course, then a lot of the other track stuff comes off because it's sort of flowed in there. I tried, before I took it out, reflowing solder around it. That didn't work either. So in that sense, I thought, having taken this out and then having no strategy for getting it back, I thought, well, that's it, isn't it? I've absolutely killed this set now. And I thought, well, the only thing to do is try and wire it back in, as I've done here with a bit of ribbon cable, to get it back on there. And I've still got a challenge of how to fix it on there, and it still go back in the case, because the case actually comes quite close to the back of here, which I didn't really think about when I was doing this, and I didn't make these wires long enough to go around the other side. That would have been perhaps a better way to do it, although I was trying not to make the wires too long, because doing it like this, there's always a risk when you lengthen wires, particularly in audio output stages like this, that you introduce a bit of instability into the circuit and starts oscillating. Well, it hasn't done that, I'm glad to say. I'll demonstrate it all working in a minute, but it might be that I do have to rewire it and get it around the other side to get it back in the case. I've done a quick dry run and that didn't seem to be the case, but it depends how much standoff I have to put on here to get it onto the board and not have it flapping about in the breeze like this. So having wired it all up, it still didn't work, and you may have noticed, more eagle-eyed among you may have noticed here, that this 3.3k resistor is newer than the others. Now, also was the next thing that threw me out a bit, because I was trying to measure around that, because let's just have a look at the circuit and see where that resistor sits. Okay, now the shaded area on this diagram shows you where the board is. So those two, that 3k3 resistor is this one here, and that point there where it joins onto it is pin 14 that I showed you, which had mostly gone away. And I thought I could join to a little bit of it, but I couldn't do that. So I decided what I'd do was instead I'd solder that wire, which should have gone to what was left of that track, right onto that resistor instead on the back of it, which is what I did. Except that when I started soldering on the back of the resistor, it sort of split in half, or rather it had already split in half, and that was what I hadn't noticed. So as soon as I soldered one end of it, it sort of just came in two. And I'd sort of had an inkling of that before, because I was trying to get it working by just rewiring it. I couldn't. I'd done the rewiring, and I thought, why isn't it working now? And I found that if I put the, you see this here top line here is the positive battery, and if I put the positive battery onto this side of the resistor, it worked in a very distorted way, and then if I took it off again, it worked fine for about 5 seconds, and presumably that's while this capacitor starts discharging into here, bringing it down to the right level. It's obviously putting 9 volts directly on there doesn't work and saturates that transistor. So that should have given me a clue, really, that that resistor was open circuit. But you don't normally get these film resistors go open circuit, and you know, it's very strange for it to have broken in half, but obviously it's soldered in very tightly, and if it's broken in half, unless you look very carefully, you can't really tell. So having put another 3.3k resistor in there and wired it back onto the end of it, it's fine. Now that wasn't the end of it. If you can see here, there's a sort of bit of gluing around the mains transformer. That gluing was there before, and that came apart while I was working on it. So that little casing holding the mains transformer in it, and obviously that's had to be glued in the past, and that's why presumably it was dismantled before and then didn't get put back quite straight. And then I thought I got it all working, but then found that the AM wasn't very good. It was a bit intermittent, and that again came to one of these boards. So that board at the top that carries the connections from the aerial, that had gone a bit funny as well. And I thought, well, I'll just reflow these things here where it joins in, and that seemed to improve it a little bit, but it still wasn't right. And then I found by flexing this board, this whole board like this, it was starting to work. So I then went around looking for broken tracks in the AM section. Well, that was a complete waste of time, and I didn't really need to do that, because the actual problem was where one of the wires here, this one in fact, that comes from the tuning capacitor, I think, goes onto the board, and I'll just show you the video of that now. That was actually not joined onto the metal on the other side. That was the real reason why it was not working. And again, if I'd looked a little bit more closer, maybe I'd have seen that that was what was flexing. But it took me a while to find it. So I have got it all back into, well, sort of into shape now, and it's working again. So let's plug that up and give us some proof of the pudding there.
What would you say is the mood at the football club now, Steve, now that you're beginning to sadly have to get used to the odds?
Yeah, it must.
In the one event, and he swims semi-final later today. We'll get our first look at Duncan Scott in the men's 200-metre individual medley semi-finals as well, and Great Britain involved in 2 of the 4 finals this afternoon.
That charge you for a withdrawal. Exactly. How can you charge me for taking out my own money?
So yeah, overall it's sounding pretty good. It's all working on both AM and FM. You can hear the tone control, the volume control is quite clean and everything. So I think it's ready to go back together. As I said, I'll probably change the caps, put a slightly longer wire on the speaker because that's irritating me a bit. The only issue I've got is trying to mount that board in. I think given the number of things that's happened, the fact that it had a broken transformer case, a resistor had broken in the middle, the connections from the board, I think that little board with the through, like this one and the other one, those boards that go through the circuit board are a terrible piece of design really, and a bit of an aberration for a Grundig set. That said, I have seen this on other Grundig sets and I've not had problems with it. And I think when you look at the whole picture, you don't have to be Hercule Poirot to realise that this has had a bit of a Newtonian incident at some point, 9.8 metres per second squared. And therefore, I can quite understand why people decided to stop trying to repair it. So anyway, let's get it all back together and have a final look at it.
But more buses on existing roads, more trains on existing roads, in my opinion. And just don't destroy wildlife unless you really, really have to.
And from 7th to the 11th of August, it's the Cresset Summer School, a week of workshops culminating in a fantastic Friday performance.
ISAs or even a pension, that it's put into that, so that for your future.
No question, no doubt, nobody has.
Well, there we go, it's working, finally. And I think it was worth it. It's not a bad radio. It's not right at the top end of the Grundigs, but a Grundig is always, I think, a nice piece of work to get going again, even if it's obviously been dropped or had a hard life like this one. I thought at one point I'd completely wrecked this, and obviously I didn't help myself with some of the wrong paths that I went down. One of the things I will say about it is rather like the City Boy that we looked at quite a long time ago now. Its sensitivity on FM is actually not that good, and I found that with a few other of the lesser Grundig radios. You know, if you look at something like the Hacker, it is much better sounding on FM than this is, and obviously it would have been a much more expensive set at the time. But then on the positive side of this one, it goes up to 108 megahertz, so it's not like the old Hackers limited at 101, or even like some of the other ones going, you know, only going up to 104. So it is quite usable as a radio in the modern world, at least until they get rid of FM. And the AM is quite good. So I hope that was of interest to you. I'm sure I'll be back soon with another apparently simple fix that turns into a 3-day job.